Ну, это какой-то пиздец. Мы в изоляции. Я просто выхожу из дома, у меня телефон превращается в кирпич, потому что не работает нихуя.
Putin has plunged all Russians into a digital blackout. The situation is now dire for Russians.
Я приезжаю на заправку, и мне нужно иметь с собой карточку, потому что у меня не работает мобильный интернет.
Millions of Russians, from Moscow to St. Petersburg, are facing a terrifying nightmare. Because Russia has decided to cut off mobile internet for 24 hours, and perhaps even permanently, in 74 different regions. The symbolic hardest-hit area by this digital blockade was St. Petersburg. The city of 5.6 million people woke up to a digital blackout on Tuesday morning, November 11th. According to Detector 404 data, 130,000 people in the city reported problems with their internet connection. This is only the number of those who were able to report it. The actual number is in the millions. Of course, state television and propaganda channels continue to say, everything is fine, the operation is proceeding according to plan. But when those 5.6 million people in St. Petersburg looked at their phone screens instead of out the window, they saw the truth. What was the truth? No internet. But this wasn't a simple case of the internet slowed down. This meant modern life was paralyzed. Petersburg residents couldn't access websites. Messaging apps went silent. Online banking services crashed. People couldn't access their own money or pay their bills. Food delivery services? Not working. Finding a taxi? Impossible. The second major shock for Russians came from the Ulyanovsk region. On November 11th, the Ulyanovsk region, with a population of 600,000, implemented its first permanent mobile internet blackout. The Moscow Times report clarifies the situation. This is the first permanent internet outage in the country. And now, brace yourselves. Do you know how long these outages in Ulyanovsk are claimed to last? Until the end of the special operation. I repeat, until the end of the special operation. Can you imagine? A war with no end date, a war that even Putin doesn't know when it will end, a war that could last for years, and thousands, maybe millions of people deprived of the internet until this war ends. This is the true face Putin shows to the Russian people. So, do you know what the one thing was that miraculously worked in the midst of that chaos? Gosuslugi. That is, the government's official state services portal. The Kremlin, of course, tried to market this situation as, we are protecting our people. Don't panic, essential services will continue to function, they said. This is where what happened in the Ulyanovsk region exposed this lie. Russian authorities announced they had created a white list while restricting internet access in Ulyanovsk. So, what really happened? Investigative news outlet iStories uncovered what residents in Ulyanovsk reported. Most of the platforms on that whitelist didn't work. Yandex didn't work. VK didn't work. People couldn't place orders on Ozon. And this seems like just the beginning. Here's the final and most alarming step. Now listen to the words of Russian lawmaker Alexei Chepa. Chepa said that if interference is detected in the 2026 elections, Russia's global internet connection could be cut off. Starting March 1st, 2026, the Russian government will grant the regulatory body Roskomnadzor, Putin's censorship machine, the authority to block any website and, most importantly, to disconnect the Russian segment of the internet from the global network. This information was reported by the Center for Countering Disinformation within the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. This decision was justified under the guise of national security and protecting critical infrastructure. But let's read this decision correctly. This is not a show of strength, it is an admission of weakness. It means that Putin is preparing to sever all ties between the Russian people and the outside world before and during his sham election in 2026. It is Putin's admission that he cannot protect his own airspace against Ukraine's relatively inexpensive drones, that he cannot compete with them technologically. And who is paying the price for this admission? Not the warlords or oligarchs. The price is being paid by that young woman in Tyumen, the student in St. Petersburg, the taxi driver in Moscow. In other words, ordinary Russians. Putin made a very clear choice and was presented with two options. Risk the destruction of his military assets and refineries and sacrifice the civilian economy and society. Putin chose the second option without hesitation, sacrificing his own people. Because he doesn't want protests organized on social media platforms like Telegram if anyone challenges the 2026 election results. Because he doesn't want the people, tired of the economic crisis, the war, and the losses, to show their anger on Kontakta. Let's understand this with a very tragic example from within Russia. A Russian medical student read something about Ukraine's Azov regiment while on the bus. Federal agents later arrested Sergei on charges of violating Russia's newly enacted ban on searching for extremist content. Russia has just begun enforcing the extremist searches ban, and there is curiosity about how selectively the police will act. However, Sergei's case demonstrates that internet surveillance can respond almost instantly. This clearly reveals the regime's character, its priorities, and most importantly, its perspective on its own people. War is now more important than anything else. The people are merely a resource to fuel this war machine, and this resource can be discarded when necessary. The Kremlin pressed the panic button, but this button shut down not only the drones, but the entire life support system of Russian society. And the domino effect triggered by this decision proved far more devastating than the Kremlin had calculated. My phone turned into a brick. This statement is not just a complaint, it is a factual observation. And this fact shows how modern civilian life in Russia was suddenly paralyzed. So what could have driven Putin to panic so much that he would turn his own citizens' modern life and his own digital economy back to the Stone Age in a single night? The answer comes from the sky: Ukraine's long-range drones. First, let's clarify the picture. Ukraine's UAV attacks have been ongoing since the beginning of the war. However, these attacks have changed in nature recently. They are no longer limited to the border areas, but are now targeting strategic targets deep inside Russia, hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, including refineries, military bases, and command centers. And these UAVs are becoming increasingly intelligent. How do they find their targets in Russia's vast geography, in areas with dense electronic warfare systems, in environments where GPS signals are jammed? Here lies the answer that is causing panic in the Kremlin. According to claims, these UAVs use civilian mobile internet infrastructure, the 4G and 5G networks used by ordinary Russian citizens, to lock onto their targets with precision, perhaps to receive last-minute confirmations or coordinate complex attack sequences. This is a textbook example of asymmetric warfare for Ukraine, turning the enemy's strongest point, its most modern and widespread infrastructure, into a weapon against it. So, what was the high-tech solution the Putin regime found to counter this modern and sophisticated threat? The Kremlin solution was a sledgehammer. If the enemy is using an outlet inside your home, Putin's solution was not to turn off that outlet, but to pull the plug on the entire city. Let's fully grasp what these outages mean and their impact on daily life. Russia, especially in its major cities, had undergone a tremendous digital transformation over the past 20 years. They boasted of having established a digital ecosystem that was more advanced than the West, where cash usage had declined, and everything was done with a single click. Putin's hammer fell precisely on this source of pride. Russia's major cities had largely transformed into a cashless society. People received their salaries digitally, paid for their coffee with their phones, and rode the metro with their cards. And then, the internet went down. POS terminals in stores started displaying "no connection" warnings. People had to leave their food-filled carts at the checkout and walk away. Russians suddenly had to go on a cash hunt. But who carried that much cash with them? The most painful part was this: even the national payment system Mir, which the Putin regime had been marketing for years as our sovereign alternative to Western sanctions, was affected by these outages. Because Mir also needed an internet connection to work. So the Russian people saw that it was not the withdrawal of Visa or MasterCard from Russia that threatened their modern life, but the Kremlin's own decisions. Putin had rendered his own sovereign system inoperable with his own sovereign decision. This was proof of how empty Putin's promise of stability to his people really was. What is transportation like in a modern city without the internet? Yandex Taxi, Russia's Uber, disappeared in an instant. Millions of people could no longer call a car through an app to get to work or home. Taxi drivers turned off their ignitions because they couldn't use navigation or find customers. The digital screens at bus stops went dark. People began waiting in the cold, not knowing when the next bus would arrive. Digital payment systems at metro turnstiles crashed, creating long queues. This situation, dubbed SIM-less city by Medusa, instantly transported cities back to the 1990s. This situation affected not only the local population, but also the few remaining tourists and business people in the country. As Russia digitally closed itself off from the world, it also presented an image of being trapped within itself. The internet outage affected not only payments and transportation, but every aspect of life. Russia's major e-commerce platforms, Ozon and Wildberries, were unable to coordinate their delivery networks. People's orders for food, medicine, and basic necessities were cancelled. Couriers couldn't find addresses or communicate with customers. Cafes, restaurants, small shops. Most were dependent on online ordering and payment systems. They lost a large portion of their income in a single day, the most basic human need. People couldn't reach their families, children, or loved ones in the midst of this chaos. When WhatsApp and Telegram stopped working, only fear and isolation remained.
Welcome to the Barents Observer, and this podcast where we bring up pressing issues and look behind the headlines. My name is Atle Staalesen, and in today's conversation we are going to discuss the major internet shutdowns that we currently see in Russia.
The Russian people have a genetic memory of their savings evaporating with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. They remember their money becoming worthless during the great financial crisis of 1998. Russians are accustomed to the state and banks abandoning them, and in 2025, this old fear was revived thanks to Putin's drone panic. This fear led to a rational response, a rush for cash. The fuse was lit for an economic disaster known as a bank run. During the brief intervals when the internet returned, or in front of ATMs that were still working, huge queues began to form. People rushed to bank branches to withdraw all the money from their accounts, down to the last ruble. Control will not only come from outside, but will also enter your most private spaces, namely your messages. Russia has made a new messaging app called Max, developed by the state, mandatory. Since September, all mobile devices sold in Russia must have this app pre-installed. So, what are the features of this Max app? According to information shared by Anton Gerashchenko, this app is a complete dystopian nightmare. This app not only records the messages you send, but also the text input history of messages you wrote but decided not to send, or deleted. Stop and think about this for a second. This is a thought police mechanism that monitors not only your actions, but also your thoughts, your hesitations, and even the censorship you impose on yourself. The developers, namely the FSB and the Russian state, can access all your chats, all your calls, even those moments when you think, I wish I hadn't written that. And to use this app, you need a Russian or Belarusian phone number. It's a completely closed ecosystem to the outside world. The Russian people had one last exit door to escape this digital prison: VPNs. The use of VPNs to access banned platforms in Russia, such as Instagram, Facebook, and X, and independent news sources, had reached record levels. The Kremlin is now blocking this last escape tunnel, and the language it uses to do so is no longer just about fines or imprisonment. In another video shared by Gerashchenko, we see a propaganda clip apparently produced by Putin's henchmen. This clip implies that Russians who use VPNs will face the consequences. And what are those consequences? The characters in the video are killed for using VPNs. This is no joke. This is the state openly threatening its own citizens who seek the truth with death. It shows how desperate, paranoid, and dangerous the regime has become. It's no longer enough to say, it's banned. They have to say, I'll kill you. And the legal infrastructure for this digital gulag is also being completed. Russia's internet censorship agency, Roskomnadzor, is being granted virtually unlimited powers over the internet. This means that Roskomnadzor can shut down any website, application, or social media account with a single click, without any court order. This is the complete silencing of truth and the voice of dissent under the guise of national security. When you put all these pieces together, the picture that emerges is terrifying. Putin, under the pretext of protecting against drones, is actually protecting himself from his own people's access to the truth. He fears the information virus within more than drones from outside. And in the midst of all this chaos, we see the great contradiction, the strategic impasse into which Putin's regime has fallen. This is one of the clearest moments showing how the bond between Putin and the Russian people has been severed. While these internet blackouts were happening, Russian officials made a promise. This promise reveals the regime's entire list of priorities. They said, civilian internet may be cut off, your payments may stop, taxis may not run. But state-owned and controlled media, propaganda channels, state banking services, and Russian social media will remain accessible. What does this mean? It means, as long as you keep receiving propaganda, it doesn't matter if you go hungry. As long as you can hear what the state tells you, it doesn't matter if you can't access your money. This is a situation that puts Putin and his allies, i.e. ordinary Russian people, in a bind. The people are now paying the price of war not only with the coffins of their sons who went to war, but also with their phones, which have become bricks in their daily lives. And these disruptions are no longer limited to the special military operation zone. The fact that the entire Kamchatka region was without internet for 48 hours, and that even Russian citizens returning from abroad had their mobile internet access restricted, all demonstrate the regime's deep distrust and paranoia toward its own people. While Putin tells his people, "The West is against us, we must unite," he cuts off their internet, isolating them not from the West, but from the chaos created by the Kremlin itself. This is a moment that shows the Russian people the truth, a moment when Putin undermines his own propaganda with his own actions. As a result, what we are witnessing today is one of the most ironic scenes of modern warfare. By sending a few drones into the sky, Ukraine forced Russia to sabotage its own digital economy, its own civil society, and its own banking system. Putin's drone panic is a strategic backfire, a massive digital goal scored against his own castle. This panic did not just temporarily paralyze Russia. This panic triggered a 700 billion ruble bank run, dealing a fatal blow to an already shaky financial system and destroying the last shreds of the Russian people's faith in the regime's promise of stability. Most importantly, this panic shattered Putin's myth of a modern, technological, sovereign Russia. This decision was made by a single man's paranoia in the Kremlin, the panic caused by his failed war, and a regime that does not hesitate to sacrifice its own people. The war is no longer just on the front lines. The war is in every Russian citizen's pocket, in that brick phone. So, what do you think about this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.